Today we're exploring an amazing goddess and an amazing body in astrology. We're looking at Ceres and the essential oils that work with her when you decide to harmonize and nurture yourself with her energies as well. Joining me to discuss all things Ceres is Liz. How are you today, Liz?
Well, I'm a little, it feels like trepidation because this, of course, is Demeter in the Greek archetype. And as a Melissa, this is the goddess that they worshipped. So I should have lots to say, or maybe I'll have nothing to say. We will see if I'm guarded by the secrets that she apparently was in the ancient world.
Well, let's dive deep into her. And what I found really interesting is when we look at the astrological body that carries her name. Now, first of all, when it was first discovered, they thought it was a planet. And then they discovered, oh, hold on, there's a whole bunch of asteroids around between Jupiter and Mars. She's not that special, so they downgraded her to an asteroid. But then after a while, they went, hold on, well, she's rather big and she kind of fits some other requirements. So she's now qualified as a dwarf planet. Now, our other dwarf planets are Pluto, and then you've probably seen our series already where we've looked at Gong Gong and Sedna and Humea and Mucky Mucky and so on. But they're all out beyond Neptune, whereas Ceres is just beyond Mars. And so she's quite close and quite significant. So looking at her astronomy is interesting, but when we look at her astrology, this becomes really interesting as well. To summarize, well, maybe what I'll do, Liz, is I'll ask you to share a little bit about the goddess, and then I can tie in how that kind of brings in her astrology and part of her astrological meaning.
Okay, so Ceres is the Roman name for the goddess who was worshipped as Demeter in the Greek world. And she was goddess of a lot of different things. So specifically goddess of the harvest. She was said to have brought the secrets of agriculture to the humankind. Although she's goddess of the harvest, so you would imagine her to be sort of the barley and at the time of readiness. She also has a version of Demeter Chloe, which is Demeter the Green. So this is just when the springtime is coming, and that is associated with her daughter, who was Persephone in the ancient Greek world, and Proserpine when she was Roman. So Ceres and Proserpine go together. And they together, the priestesses of Demeter core were called the Melissae. So you've probably heard me talk about the Melissa, and they presided over the mysteries of what were Demeter, and then it became the mysteries of Ceres, which were the Eleusinian mysteries, or the mysteries of Eleusis.
Amazing, amazing. So really, she is that kind of she's a goddess, and she plays an important role in when Persephone was abducted by Hades or Pluto, went into the underworld. She decided, I'm not performing my role of putting all the grains to grow, the fruits to germinate, and all that. So humanity could have starved to death in that first time if it wasn't for Zeus kind of striking a deal with Hades and saying, hey, you've got to let Persephone come back up to the earth every spring. And then obviously she goes back every autumn into the underworld to be the queen of the underworld. And that's how the Greeks and the Romans kind of looked at the cycle of the seasons, yeah?
Yes, it's slightly more nuanced than that, in that the Hades had played a trick, really, offered her a pomegranate to eat, and because she'd had, some say 4 seeds, some say 6, that's what bound her to the underworld. And yeah, the story is quite long and convoluted, actually. So I do have the plaque from the altar here, so you can
Ah,
see them. So here, this is Demeter or Ceres. This is Persephone or Proserpine. This is Triptolemus, who was the human that was given the job of riding through the skies on a serpent chariot to spread the news of the agriculture. And this lady here is a fascinating creature. known as Iambe in the ancient world, or Baubo to the Romans. And you can see that she's lifting her skirt. And in the story, we hear that she lifts her skirt to make Demeter laugh, because Demeter's sorrow is so deep that her daughter is missing. And when she lifts her skirt, we're told that she's actually a hermaphrodite underneath. So there's this idea through somewhere in the story of there being a strange sexuality somewhere, but we're never quite sure what that is. And I do have, here she is. This is one from Athens. This is Demeter, and you can see her holding her barley there. And so part of the myth, apart from her being goddess of agriculture, is she's also goddess of mothering. And her astrology, I think, will go very deeply into this association, particularly with her children.
Very much so. So let's start on that journey down the astrology. I'm going to start off by putting it simply. When I look at your Ceres sign, or anyone's Ceres sign, I think it's really valuable for anyone to look it up. Now, we have discussed in the past, you can jump on different websites like astro.com, and Ceres does have an asteroid number, although she's a dwarf planet. It's number 1. So you pop the number 1, there's a little box where you can add additional things, and you look at where she's placed in your birth chart. So just like you have a sun sign, a moon sign, and so on, you have a Ceres sign. So what's really interesting, the Ceres shows you 2 things in your Ceres sign. One, it'll show you how you tend to give care to other people. So for example, if you have Ceres in Aries is very independent, you actually support people by encouraging them to go and do it by themselves and propping them up. Whereas someone like you might have Ceres in Cancer, and Cancer is very motherly and might cook and clean and do a lot for the person. And that shows different styles. Now, the interesting thing is Ceres will show you how you tend to give nurturing and also how you like to be nurtured. But the interesting thing is these do not always match up with maybe your partner or other people in your life. It's kind of like love languages. We say that maybe my love language is acts of service, or I love people doing things for me, and so I will do things for other people. But Liz's might be words of affirmation or gift giving. So she doesn't want me to do something for her. She just wants a compliment and me to buy her some flowers on the weekend. And so if people don't understand Ceres signs, sometimes they are unable to nurture other people effectively. But it's also really good to work out how you can actually nurture yourself, because maybe we don't all need bubble baths. So I really love looking at the Ceres sign in that way.
Yeah, so I do have a 4-part course, actually, if people are interested in this, to help them actually explore the Demeter archetype, the Ceres archetype, in their own personality. And it's based on the work of a tremendous Jungian psychiatrist called Jean Shinoda Bolen, and she wrote a book called Goddesses in Every Woman. And the Demeter archetype can be really quite problematic, because we don't always have these situations where we can mother. So, for example, there might be somebody who can't have children, or there might be somebody who has a really strong mothering archetype in them, but that Persephone and Demeter have a really quite strange relationship as you go into the myths, where Demeter is really quite overbearing. And so quite often we'll see that there'll be a situation where mum can't let go of children when she goes off to university. So particularly when somebody gets into their midlife, and Ceres and Demeter rule the sort of the mother archetypes. You've got maiden, mother, crone. That once we get into that mother archetype, and empty nest can be really difficult, because particularly in our culture now, we're told that the mothering archetype is the most important thing that you can do, and particularly for people who perhaps chose not to go out to work, and then the children go off to university or get married and move away from home, then the Demeter archetype needs to find something to replace it. Or what she does is the same as actually Ceres does when Persephone is stolen away. She goes into this very, very deep depression, And as you said, she actually becomes so angry that she's manipulated, because we should say that Zeus was Persephone's father, Hades was her uncle, and Zeus was complicit in allowing her to be taken. So she is furious at all of the men in her life, and she becomes vengeful. And this can definitely happen in the personality of either somebody who's got a strong Ceres Demeter archetype, or has a big sort of transit happening in their astrology, that suddenly you're like, well, she just has become horrible. She's saying really terrible things, the way that she lashes out at people. And it can be the actually asteroid passing through your horoscope and actually affecting you that way. So, yeah, it's a really fascinating subject to explore as a woman, of, well, what is going on in my life? And of course, as you say, we can nourish through many different things. It doesn't necessarily have to be children. There can be people who've got really strong Demeter archetypes. I definitely have. We tend to be the cooks and the carers and the healers. So it's very prevalent in sort of our industry and our caring industry. But we might not have children. Obviously, I do. But other people might say, well, I don't want to have children. My vocation is caring for my patients.
Mm.
So as long as we can find that outlet, it's healthy. But if something happens to stop that outlet, so for example, maybe somebody has got a really good caring job, but then gets made redundant, and that outlet is taken away from them, again we see this dreaded psychopathy, is what Jean Chanel de Bolin calls it. Of we go into these deep, deep depressions, and they are vengeful and they are spiteful, and there is no getting out them unless you can kind of spiral back through the archetype and finding your way into maybe an Artemis archetype, or an Athena archetype, where you express yourself differently.
Yeah. So let's dive into some essential oils. Now, one of the challenges I find trying to attach essential oils to Ceres is that most of the plants that she's associated with, things like grains and so on, they don't really produce essential oils. She's not really associated with roses or the pine tree or anything like that. So the first one that I find really beautiful from that kind of nurturing aspect and just bringing a bit more nurturing energy into our space is cassia. Now, cassia, what I love about it is, it's that bark that kind of wraps around and it's got that warm aroma to it. And although it may not be directly kind of this is something that is Ceres energy, it has that comforting, nurturing, cinnamon-like aroma that makes us just feel warm and supported. So when you feel, and a great time that I think cassia is really beautiful to work with is actually when Ceres goes into retrograde each year. So she takes her nurturing energy away from the earth. So what starts to happen is we start to feel a bit unnurtured. And you have two options with all retrogrades. But with this one, you can either fall on the floor and cry and go, it's all too hard, or you can learn the lesson of that retrograde. So the lesson of Ceres retrograde is, well, if no one is nurturing me, and if I'm not getting my needs met by anyone out there, I guess I should learn how to nurture my own self. And leaning into oils like cassia and just, preferably, I like to diffuse cassia because of its warm cinnamon kind of aroma. You've got to be very careful and heavy dilution if you are going to use it topically. But just having that in your diffuser around your space is beautiful for just kind of, everyone knows what cassia and cinnamon smells like. It just feels comforting, supportive, and just like the oil kind of embraces you and the bark embraces, you feel embraced as well.
I feel like I'm having difficulty with that recommendation, because I can feel what you're saying about it being warming and nurturing. My word that I would choose for cassia would always be spiteful. It's such an aggressive oil, sharp on the skin. And actually, Demeter, when she's in retrograde, when she is spiteful. So I can see how that would be a good recommendation. I think it's one of those situations where you would have to pick it up and go, does this work for me? Because I know that wouldn't work for me. In reference to what you said about the grains, I have come across that before and kind of negotiated my way through it. So she's also goddess of the grass. And so actually there's quite a lot of grasses that we could use. Palmarosa, lemongrass, vetiver, and I would have thought the vetiver is the comforting one that I would go for that way.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense for sure. Another one, it's one that I haven't had much experience with, but sweetgrass or hops, which kind of has that more kind of grassy kind of aroma to it, could be another one that you could kind of capture that essence to as well.
I'm Elizabeth Ashley, UK Director for the National Association of Holistic Aromatherapy and founder of the Aromatic Mystery School, where essential oils meet the deeper, more mystical side of healing. Here you'll explore the spiritual, emotional and energetic dimensions of plants and learn how to weave them into your own rituals and well-being practices. If you're ready to work in a way that nourishes both your soul and your senses, join us at the Aromatic Mystery School. The link's right below.
What are other oils that you find would work really well with Ceres?
So I think the most important one is what people would say was quite a boring oil, really, and that's lavender. Because I think that of all the oils, that's the one that understands what it feels like to be a mother and how to care for somebody. You know, it has that sort of feeling of, shh, it's all right, everything's going to be okay. And I think you're quite right that when she goes into retrograde, one of the things that we see in the Demeter archetype, for example, is maybe the kids have gone off to university, and it's not that they've necessarily moved out, even they've just emotionally moved out and mentally moved out because they're concentrating on something else. And that can be really quite difficult for somebody who's got a strong Demeter archetype, because she's like, well, they don't want me anymore, you know. And so that can be, that it sounds really spiteful and petty and stuff, but if that's been your whole life, and incidentally, like if you had a hero archetype, you would have been the wife, you know, you would have been focusing on Zeus's side all of the time. So if you're a friend of a Demeter person and you're a hero person, you won't get this at all. You'll be like, just, you know, I don't understand why you've been cosseting them so much, and you need to really stop helicoptering, you know. But Ceres retrograde can feel extremely lonely for somebody who's focused their life like that, and lavender's very good at being able to say shush, calm down, and kind of sends that energy they've been sending out to their children back to them in a way.
Another oil that I would associate with Ceres, but I wouldn't associate the oil back with her if I was like, what goddesses work with this oil? But myrrh as well, as that kind of nurturing, mothering, healing of wounds, being there, I think is really a nice kind of earthy one to kind of work with as well. What do you think of myrrh for Ceres?
Well, so I think that's a really good recommendation. And actually, there's strange kind of coincidences in the mythology if you think about myrrh. So, for example, we know that she's connected with Persephone, and there is a story of how Aphrodite is out with her lover Adonis, who's obviously descended from the myrrh tree, and because his mother is Myrrha, and he gets shot by an arrow, and he gets sent down to the underworld. So he's with Persephone for quite a long time. And if he's descended from a myrrh tree, then he must be myrrh, because they say he's in a box, so he must be a box of myrrh. So I think that's interesting. And one of the other most famous times that we hear about the rites of Ceres is in the myrrh story. So when we're hearing about Myrrha being cursed by Aphrodite because Kentraeus has said to her, well, my daughter's every bit as beautiful as Aphrodite. She's like, enough of that. And she curses her to fall in love with her father. And eventually a situation is set up by the housemaid where she will meet her father in the dark and copulate with him in the dark. which she does over a series of nights. And we're told in Metamorphoses that the reason that Cantrace is not in the house is because she's visiting the rites of Ceres. She's actually gone off to do that religious action. So Ceres is also kind of involved in the myrrh story in several different ways from aspects. And I think the vibration of myrrh is definitely, it is a mothering oil. So I think that's a really good one.
Yeah, and then so my third one would be again, kind of. I struggled a little bit to work out with essential oils that fit directly with the goddess, but I do love Douglas fir. For me, I've talked about I think I've talked about on this podcast before the mythology of Douglas fir. But there is a Native American myth that once there was a wildfire going through a forest, and poor Mother Mouse was trying to find a place to hide all her baby children. So she ran up to the bear and she's like, "Bear, bear, where can I hide my children?" And he's like, "I can't help you. I'm trying to get away from the fire." And then she runs up to the wolf. "Wolf, wolf, where can I hide my babies?" "I can't help you. I'm trying to get away from the fire." And she ran up to the owl and, no one could help her. And the fire got closer and closer and closer till eventually she started to accept the inevitable, that she'd never be able to find a home for her baby children, and her and them would all perish in the fire. And at that point, she started to cry. And then the Douglas fir tree leaned down and whispered to her for her children to climb up into the cones of the tree. And if you actually look at a Douglas fir cone, you'll actually see these 3 points kind of dangling out of the cone. And it looks like tails and hind legs of mice. So Douglas fir has been associated with that kind of support when we're feeling overwhelmed. There is a tradition in some North American tribes where when a baby is born, they'll take the umbilical cord and weave it amongst a sapling of a Douglas fir tree, and that tree becomes almost like the soul tree of that individual for their whole life, that they can go and connect with and find solace in challenging times in their life. The high beta pinene in Douglas fir is higher than the alpha pinene that we find in other conifers, is so relaxing to the nervous system. And I think that green, fresh aroma of this essential oil, along with the chemistry and its impact on our nervous system, can be really powerful in helping us to feel that nurturing when we need it and when we want to work with it. So I really love that one for Ceres as well.
I love that. I've never heard that story before. That's good. Yeah, I've never heard any of that before. That's lovely. Yeah. It's not an oil that I would have chosen. Not because it's wrong. I think it's absolutely right, but I wouldn't have really thought about attacking it, if you like, from that angle. So that's lovely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So any other oils that you would associate with Ceres?
Yeah. So the medicines, or the medical astrology of the Ceres is kind of in its infancy, not so much as it was with the dwarf planets, but I think it's established enough now to be able to make some recommendations. So with the Ceres archetype, or the Ceres asteroid, if it's having a transit through your sign, what you might find, or if it's in an opposition to one of your key planets, is usually problems with the digestive system from the point of view of being able to metabolize it. And so it's very involved with things like food sensitivities. And while I haven't seen it written anywhere, I feel sure that we can push that a bit more and say things like gluten intolerance and celiac disease, because that's the grain, isn't it? That's exactly what she is. But also what we see, because particularly in the Greek, she is a double goddess. So she is Demeter core. She is Demeter and the maiden. Core is the maiden. So, and Persephone. And what we will often see with anything to do with Persephone is teenage anxiety, and like the teenage angst, if you like, the dark side of being a teenager, and in particular eating disorders. So the oil that I think would be most useful in this environment is actually one that is quite hard to use, and that's tarragon. because tarragon is really good for the appetite. And I found it so useful in a diffuser, in an evaporator, when Daryl was ill and he was going through his radiotherapy, and he, as you know, his mouth became so ulcerated. And of course he was nauseous. He just didn't want to eat anything. But we put a couple of drops of tarragon with some ginger and grapefruit, and within days his mouth started to water. Now, that doesn't seem like a big thing, but all of the saliva glands were infected and not working. So for even now, when he's well, he doesn't have any saliva glands to actually for his mouth to water. So we quite often, if he starts to feel very down, put the tarragon in, and it helps him to start to want to eat again. And it's not just about the mouth watering. It's like he feels quite positive about the experience of eating, which can be quite difficult. And so that would be my main recommendation for Ceres, alongside with the lavender. And as I said, the vetiver, because I think that vetiver, it is a grass. It's extremely tall grass, and of course it goes right down into the earth. I don't know if you know that most plants will grow their roots outwards. But the reason why vetiver is so useful ecologically is because they go directly down, right down into the realm of Persephone. And they can really anchor the soil in place. And it'll help to actually help the nutrients and the ecology of the soil. It will clear the soil. And I think in a human situation, it also does that it helps you to kind of appreciate what's going on around you and take nourishment from that, as well as being so calming. And it's a really good oil for somebody who is lonely, which is obviously a key thing in this archetype. So yeah, I would say vetiver would be really helpful too.
I love them. I love them. One thing I think is interesting to kind of contemplate also with Ceres as well is the idea of rulership. So we know that each zodiac sign has a ruler. So, for example, Aries is ruled by Mars, or Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. You will notice that before we knew about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, that, for example, Scorpio was ruled by Mars as well, and Pisces was ruled by Jupiter, and so on. So they kind of spread the signs out over the planets. Now, we still have two signs being ruled by two planets, and that is Mercury rules both Virgo and Gemini, and Venus rules both Taurus and Libra. There is some discussion about amongst modern astrologers that possibly Ceres could be the ruler of Virgo. And so there's that kind of, because Virgo is that healer and that carer and that orderly kind of person as well. So I think that's a really interesting point to contemplate, especially if you are a Virgo. Virgo does have some aspects to Mercury, but I can also see how Virgo is very fitting to Ceres as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you were a devotee of Demeter, and actually every married woman right across Greece was expected that they would be. There were certain pledges that you had to make and certain actions you had to take, because it was believed that she could turn up at any given time and inspect your work. So, for example, she was in charge of and took responsibility of the threshing floor. So once you had ground all of your flour, your barley or whatever, into flour, that you made sure that it was really clean and tidy afterwards. She's also a bee priestess, of course. She was called Melissa, and her daughter was called Melitodes. And this idea of cleaning up after yourself, if you leave any honey around the hives, then you are just going to attract swarms and swarms of bees who are going to rob your hives. So she definitely has that kind of Virgo, let's be really ordered, let's be really responsible about how we do things, let's have systems. She had systems all over the place. And the deeper you look into her work, the more you find systems. So I think, yeah, she really matches with the Virgo rulership really well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think for anyone who has a lot of Virgo in their birth chart, diving into this series element could be really kind of helpful for them and beneficial for expanding, I guess, knowledge of oneself and relating to oneself in a different type of archetype as well. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you think we need to know about Demeter or Ceres, since you have had, a lot of time immersing yourself with her? Is there any other secrets that she wants you to unveil today?
Well, I mean, she is the Melissa. So if somebody really wanted to get involved in it, then you would start with the Melissa oil. I mean, you could go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. So I will say, if you do want to explore the archetype, I have a course, so I will leave that link for you. And there is a couple of Melissa meditations within that. But no, I think within this situation, I don't think there's anything else that I want to say. No.
Beautiful. Well, we would love to know in the comment section, have you ever looked at your Ceres sign, or have you looked at it because you're watching this video now? What have you discovered about yourself? And are some of the essential oils that we've discussed today helping you out to dive a little bit deeper into that? We'll be back very, very soon to share some more about the magical aspects of the gifts of Mother Earth and her essential oils. Until then, take care and blessed be.
Bye-bye.
There's a lot happening in the world right now. There's wars, there's financial pressures, there's health concerns, and all of this can be quite overwhelming. Just open up social media and you're going to be subjected with all these different things which can kind of drag you into more and more gloom. I've been reflecting on this recently, and then I think about when I just step out my own back door and immerse myself in nature. Nature helps us to find peace, harmony, and to put everything into perspective. Recently, I've wanted to try and help people to engage a bit more with nature through different gifts of nature, such as essential oils and crystals and so on. But being able to stretch out and reach people that way is often through that overwhelming social media. So I've come up with a solution. I've created a collective, a community where we can all gather and we can share our experiences with our oils, with our crystals, with nature, as the animals sing and dance and talk to us in different ways. And I'd like to invite you to join this community. It's called the Living with Nature Collective, and it is available to you to come in and interact and meet like-minded people. Our life is generated by what we give attention to, and it's time to start giving more attention to nature in a way that you're not surrounded by other barrages of information. I'd like to offer you a 7-day free trial for my new collective, and if you look at the link below, you can click today and check it out. Come in, introduce yourself, meet other people, and be able to experience live classes, pre-recorded classes, conversations, polls, work out what's happening astrologically, what crystals are the best for you right now, and have your questions answered by me and other experts as well. I'm really excited to launch this new initiative of the Living with Nature Collective, so please check out the link below, come say hi, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Life moves fast. There's constant noise, urgency, and pressure, and so much happening in the world right now that can leave you feeling depressed, drained, defeated. Somewhere amongst all the noise, you feel a quiet calling within, suggesting that something is missing. Like you've drifted away from what really matters. But nature hasn't gone anywhere. She's still there, waiting for you to return. That's why the Living with Nature Collective exists. A global, interactive community of like-minded people. Your tribe. Discover how to return to living in flow with the seasons, blossoming, shining, releasing and pausing with the land. Each week, you'll discover simple ways to connect with crystals, essential oils, astrology, the moon, animal wisdom, angels, and more. If you've been looking for something, you've found it. Step back into the garden, the forest, the ocean. Join the Living with Nature Collective today.